The wind off Coronado carried that faint salt sting that always reminded Daniel Hale of deployments he'd never actually taken. He wasn't military, never had been. But he had spent enough years working the docks and the repair yards that the sound of humming engines, the clank of steel and the slap of waves against gray hulls made him feel as though he understood something about the rhythm of men who served. His 8-year-old son, Mason, clung to his hand as they waited in the visitor line outside the temporary command tent where the SEAL demonstration would finish with a meet and greet. Mason's eyes were bright with excitement that only a little boy obsessed with adventure could have, especially a boy who had grown up on stories. Daniel told him to fill the ache of a missing mother, and today Daniel thought would be a good day for the kid. He got the day off work, got Mason out of school with the promise of seeing real warriors, and convinced the coordinator that civilian parents were allowed at the event as long as they had clearance for the base entry. It wasn't often Daniel gave himself a break, but Mason deserved something special. The demonstration had been loud and dramatic, fast roping from helicopters, rigid hull boats cutting across the bay, mock rescues, and the kind of tactical precision that made the crowd gasp and cheer. And now, families of service members lined up alongside civilians who had been invited, forming a loose, chattering group. Daniel wiped sweat from his forehead and tugged Mason closer, reminding him to stay polite, not to run off, and to keep that cap on his head so he wouldn't sunburn again. The little boy bobbed his head up and down impatiently. "Dad, do you think they'll let me see the night vision goggles?" Mason asked for the 5th time. "You can ask," Daniel said. "Just don't try to take any selfies with them unless they say okay." Mason stifled a laugh. "I won't." When the line edged forward, Daniel adjusted the strap of his worn backpack. Inside were snacks, water bottles, and a folded-up certificate Mason had earned in class for bravery during a fire drill. The kid wanted to give it to a SEAL because brave should meet brave, and Daniel didn't have the heart to say no. Sometimes he wished he could give his son more. A bigger home, a more stable life, someone else who could help raise him. But every day since the night Mason's mother left, Daniel had sworn to be both parents. He had no family left. It was just him and the boy. When they reached the front of the tent, an officer with silver in his hair glanced at their visitor badges and waved them inside. The air conditioning inside was a relief. The tent wasn't large, but it was set up with a table of gear, a few chairs, and a row of uniformed men and women shaking hands with attendees. There was also at the center a tall man in desert camis, sleeves rolled, jaw squared, presence unmistakable. Even before seeing his nameplate, Daniel recognized him from the announcement brochure. Rear Admiral Ryan Sterling, commanding officer of a major special warfare group. The man was a legend even outside military circles. Medal of Honor recipient, multiple deployments, a leader whose calm command under pressure had earned him reverence from every operator who served under him. And apparently, today he was the one assigned to greet the civilians. Daniel swallowed. He wasn't easily intimidated, but he felt suddenly underdressed. Just dark jeans, a simple shirt, and the baseball cap Mason had insisted he wear. Mason tugged his hand, practically vibrating. "Dad, Admiral Sterling is right there." "I see him," Daniel murmured. Admiral Sterling had a controlled, polite smile as he shook hands, but it softened noticeably when he leaned down to speak to children in the line. He took time with every one of them. Daniel observed the small things, how the Admiral anchored his posture so the kids felt comfortable, how he engaged even the shy ones. It shifted Daniel's impression of him from imposing to impressive. When it was their turn, the Admiral straightened and extended his hand toward Daniel first. His grip was firm but respectful, the kind of handshake that made you feel seen. "Thank you for coming today," Sterling said. His voice had that gravelly confidence seasoned soldiers seem to carry. Then he looked down at Mason. "And who do we have here?" "I'm Mason," the boy announced proudly. "I'm 8, and my dad brought me because I want to be brave like you." Sterling's eyes warmed. "That so? I think you're pretty brave already, coming up here and saying that." Mason grinned and reached into his father's backpack before Daniel could stop him. He pulled out the folded certificate and thrust it forward. "I got this for being brave in a fire drill." "You can have it." The Admiral blinked, visibly moved. He knelt so he was eye level with the boy, and accepted the paper with both hands as if it were a medal. "This means more than you know," he said softly. "Thank you, Mason." Daniel's chest tightened. The man's sincerity hit deeper than expected. Maybe it was because Daniel tried so hard to be enough for his son that seeing someone of such magnitude treat Mason with kindness stirred something vulnerable. Then Sterling stood and turned back to Daniel with a teasing lift of one brow. "And you? What's your story? Are you military?" Daniel shook his head. "No, sir. Just a mechanic." "Good trade," Sterling said approvingly. "Then, Dad first class?" Daniel chuckled, caught off guard. Maybe it was the heat earlier or nerves, or simply that he'd spent years telling Mason bedtime stories about make-believe, missions they embarked on together. Missions where Daniel had to be more than ordinary to make his kid feel safe. Without overthinking it, he answered with a crooked smile, "Fleet Commander." Silence hit like a dropped weight. The Admiral's expression froze. His eyes, hard, sharp, assessing, snapped fully onto Daniel as though trying to parse something impossible. The humor drained from his face in an instant. Daniel blinked. "I was joking." But Sterling wasn't moving. In fact, his complexion went pale. Not white, but the stunned, blood-drained pallor of someone who had just realized the ground wasn't where he thought it was. His hand let go of Daniel's. He swayed. "Sir?" one of the nearby operators asked. Before Daniel could comprehend what was happening, Admiral Sterling's knees buckled. He collapsed. Shouts erupted. People moved. Medics responded with trained efficiency. Daniel yanked Mason behind him, shielding him instinctively while dozens of thoughts collided in his head. What did I do? Did he have heat stroke? Did my stupid joke cause something? Sterling was conscious within seconds, blinking up at the ceiling of the tent while a corpsman checked his pulse. "I'm fine," he muttered, trying to sit up. "You collapsed, sir," the corpsman said firmly. "Stay down for a minute." Sterling ignored him, locking his gaze back on Daniel with something that looked less like confusion and more like recognition. That was impossible, Daniel thought. They had never met. But the Admiral's stare seemed to reach into him, like a man comparing a memory to a face, right in front of him. After a moment, the Admiral finally spoke. "Fleet Commander, Daniel Hale?" Daniel froze. How did he know his name? He didn't remember giving it. Before he could ask, a senior chief on the Admiral's left leaned down urgently. "Sir, do you want us to clear the room?" Sterling pushed himself upright with help, refusing the stretcher someone was trying to bring. He brushed the dust from his uniform, straightened, and then said the last thing Daniel expected. "No, I want him to stay." The words didn't feel like they were meant for a stranger. And Daniel's pulse climbed in alarm and confusion. Someone ushered the remaining civilians out, leaving a handful of operators, a rattled corpsman, Daniel, and Mason in the tent. Sterling dismissed the corpsman with a nod, and when they were alone enough for conversation, he walked up to Daniel slowly, as though approaching something fragile or volatile. Daniel instinctively stepped back. "Look, if my joke offended you..." "It didn't." "Then what?" "I know that title," Sterling said quietly. "Fleet Commander. It's not a real Navy rank, but it is a title used somewhere else." Daniel stared. "Somewhere else?" Sterling studied him. "Classified somewhere else." Daniel exhaled sharply. "Are you messing with me?" "No," the Admiral said. "And if you are who I think you are, you're not messing with me either." "I'm a mechanic," Daniel insisted. "I fix engines." "That's it. I don't know anything about whatever you're implying." "Don't you?" Sterling murmured. Daniel felt heat rise across the back of his neck. This was absurd. He had no military background. The closest he'd ever come to anything tactical was repairing docking clamps on Coast Guard patrol boats. Yet something in the Admiral's tone dug at something, buried deep like a tug on a thread. He didn't realize existed. Mason clutched his father's shirt, worried. "Dad, what's happening?" Daniel forced his voice calm. "Nothing, buddy. Everything's okay." Sterling's expression softened again when he looked at the boy. "You said your name is Mason, right?" "Yes," Mason whispered. "You're safe," Sterling said gently. "Your dad didn't do anything wrong. I just recognized something I didn't expect." He turned back to Daniel. "Can we talk privately for 5 minutes? The chief will watch your son." "No," Daniel said instantly, pulling Mason closer. He stays with me. Something flickered in Sterling's eyes. Respect. All right. Then we talked together. The Admiral motioned toward a quieter corner of the tent. They moved there, and when Sterling finally spoke, his voice was lower than before, weighted. 12 years ago, he began. There was an incident involving a covert multinational task group. Something top tier. Off most books. You wouldn't know about it. But the intel we received included a name, Daniel Hale, code-designated fleet commander. Daniel's blood chilled. That's not me, he said automatically. I was 20 at the time, working 2 jobs, taking care of my mom. Sterling nodded slowly. Maybe, or maybe someone used your name, your identity, your likeness. Daniel felt his breath catch. Why would anyone do that? Because whoever fleet commander was, Sterling said. They were good, brilliant, unmatched, and then they vanished. Daniel's thoughts tumbled violently. He wanted to dismiss it as mistaken identity, but something about Sterling's conviction made that impossible. And then there were the flashes, tiny, inexplicable images he'd brushed off for years. The metallic echo of doors sealing, the sensation of cold water on his face, a voice saying, "Commander?" They're here, and then darkness. He had always convinced himself those were dreams. Stress visions, leftovers from childhood trauma. But now, standing in front of a man who commanded hundreds of special operators, those fragments felt like cracks in a wall he didn't know he had built. Daniel swallowed. I'm nobody. Sterling looked at him the way a man looks at a ghost. You're not nobody. Daniel shook his head. Even if what you're saying were true, which it's not, why would something like that be classified? Why would you act like seeing me as some kind of shock? Sterling hesitated, choosing his words carefully. Because the fleet commander wasn't just a strategist or a leader. He was the architect of an entire black program, something that couldn't exist publicly, something designed to protect nations at the cost of never being acknowledged. And if you disappeared, it meant one of 2 things, either he died or he was erased. Daniel felt a cold sweat slide down his spine. You're saying someone erased me? I'm saying, Sterling replied quietly, I never thought I'd see you again, let alone at a public event. As a mechanic with a son, Daniel didn't know what to say. His body felt heavy, weighted with impossible implications, and yet he felt no threat from Sterling, no manipulation, only a stunned sincerity that made this even harder to process. Dad? Mason whispered. You look scared. Daniel knelt and hugged his son tightly, grounding himself. I'm not scared, buddy, just confused. Sterling slowly lowered himself to sit on an equipment case, rubbing his temples. When you said fleet commander, I thought you were identifying yourself. That's why I reacted. I was joking, Daniel said. I know, Sterling murmured. But it wasn't a joke I ever expected to hear from a stranger. A long silence followed. The operators kept their distance, watching discreetly. Daniel finally straightened. Admiral Sterling, even if some classified ghost with my name existed, I'm just a father trying to raise his kid. I don't know anything about missions or black programs or whatever you think. I was involved in, I understand, the Admiral said. And I'm not here to disrupt your life. Then what are you here to do? Sterling looked at him deeply. To find out whether you're living your life freely, or whether someone stole your past from you. Daniel opened his mouth, then closed it again because he didn't know. Suddenly, painfully, he didn't know. Sterling stood steady again. I won't push you, but I will give you my card. He offered it, but Daniel didn't take it. Sterling set it gently on the table instead. If you ever remember anything at all, call me. I owe you that much. Daniel's brow furrowed. Why would you owe me? The Admiral's voice was almost a whisper. Because if you are who I think you are, you saved my life once. Daniel felt the world tilt slightly. Sterling continued. And when you vanished, the world lost one of its greatest defenders. Daniel shook his head firmly. I'm just a dad. And maybe, Sterling said softly, that's the greatest cover of all. Daniel didn't respond, couldn't. He walked out of the tent with Mason's hand in his, heart pounding. The Admiral's words echoing in his mind like a half-remembered nightmare. That night after he put Mason to bed, Daniel sat alone at the small kitchen table in their apartment. He stared at the card Sterling had somehow slipped into his backpack. His fingers trembled as he held it. Rear Admiral Ryan Sterling. Direct secure line. Daniel set it down, then picked it up again. And then suddenly a memory struck like a shard of ice down his back. A voice his own. Deeper, harder, saying, "Fleet Commander signing off." He gasped and dropped the card. It shouldn't mean anything. It shouldn't, but, his pulse raced with something that felt horribly like recognition. He pressed his shaking hands to his face. "I'm just a mechanic," he whispered to himself. But the whisper didn't feel true anymore. And somewhere across the bay, Admiral Sterling sat awake in his office, staring at the same name on a classified file that had been sealed for over a decade, wondering whether fate had just returned a ghost to the world. Daniel didn't know what tomorrow would bring. He didn't know if he would call the Admiral. He didn't know if he wanted answers or if he feared them. But he did know one thing with certainty. Whatever his past was, whatever truths were buried in the shadows, he would protect Mason from it with everything he had, even if that meant facing the storm of secrets waiting for him. Even if that meant learning who he really was. And somewhere deep inside, beneath layers of forgotten years, a single word echoed again, steady, commanding, undeniable. "Commander." But Daniel pushed it down and stared out the window into the dark, clinging to the identity he understood, the identity he wanted. Father. Yet the night held its breath as if waiting. And Daniel realized that the past he never knew might soon come roaring back, not as memory, but as destiny.